Okay, so right. And we continue our series of intense webinars. And today we have a wonderful lecture by Dr. Samit Saxena. I hope that I pronounce it right, or at least reasonably close. From the East-West Center of Honolulu, and you'll make an exciting presentation on peri-urbanization and its influence on energy, environment, health in Vietnam. So, Dr. Samit, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks, Victor. Good morning to all participants for Europe. Good afternoon to participants from Southeast Asia. Before I begin, I'd like to thank the organizers of the intense webinars for giving me a chance to share our research with all of you. And so, as I understand, this is going to be a 1 hour session, so I'll try to stop around 45 minutes, so give about 10 minutes or 15 minutes for question answers. So let me share my screen here. Yeah, I hope the screen is visible here. Fine. Great. Yeah. So I am going to be talking about this concept of peri-urban areas. Basically, what it's telling us is that the world is no longer clearly divided into just rural areas and just urban areas. That used to be the old thing, maybe 40 or 50 years ago. So neither for research purposes, where scholars like to ask questions that compare a phenomena or compare a situation in urban areas versus rural areas, and learn some from that. That's no longer valid. At the same time, even for regulatory agencies, for other stakeholders, the clear division between what is rural and what is urban is fading. And that is what I'm going to explain in detail. Now, the realization that there's a peri-urban phenomena is almost 40, 50 years old, though it's only over the last 20, 30 years that it's really picked up in research as well as in governance. So while on the one hand, there's some understanding of what it is, but on the other hand, how does one actually operationalize some of these concepts? How do you actually measure peri-urbanization and map it all out? And now this issue has been studied by geographers through their lens, through by urban planners through their lens, and also maybe sociologists. We came to this field from an entirely different perspective. We were more interested in certain sustainable development uh, issues, and we began by asking ourselves this question in a project that was funded by the U.S. National Science Foundation, that what is the relationship between development or modernization on one hand and various environmental risks on the other hand? And this is the question itself is not new. Since the 70s, 80s, a lot of development specialists, economists have been asking these questions. But the thing is that typically this is what is done, that you create a graph where you have on the x-axis the development transition, and you have certain environmental and health risks plotted on the y-axis. So what people noticed is that certain things called traditional risks, they invariably decrease with increasing affluence. With as societies develop, for sure these traditional risks decrease. And what are the examples of these traditional risks? Normally, it would be things like poor water quality, sanitation issues, household air pollution due to cooking. These are essentially phenomena or problems that happen at the household scale. On the other extreme, you have what are referred to as modern risks. That is, again, invariably for sure, as societies develop, as societies and communities become richer, these risks increase uh, along with time and the state of development. Examples of this are the ozone depleting gases, climate change related greenhouse gases, maybe even plastics, plastic waste, and so on. But is this the complete story? No, it isn't, because there exists a third class of risks called transitional risks. And this is what is of greatest interest to us, that these risks initially increase with the level of affluence and with the level of development till society is able to reach a point where they think they can afford to manage these risks or control these risks, and then the risks come down as the graph shows. And examples of these are urban air pollution, deforestation, and these are risks that happen at a community level. And finally, most interestingly, you see this portion of the graph is referred to as the messy middle. It is in this messy middle stage that countries, that states, provinces are facing all the three risks at their probably highest levels. The transitional risks are the highest levels. The traditional risks are also medium level. Modern risks also are at a medium level. And things become very chaotic. And studying it scientifically is a challenge. But from the governance side, what should be the priorities? How do you control these competing risks? Those are the kind of issues that people were addressing since the 80s. But the point is that a lot of work was done on these kind of curves. They call them the environmental Kuznets curves. But largely, they were doing it at the inter-country comparison level. So you would take all the countries of the world, you would measure the level of development or level of affluence, largely measured by things like gross domestic product or human development index or some variant of these. That is what you would plot in the x-axis, and on the y-axis, they would be plotting the deforestation and urban air pollution. But in our project, or of our interest, was that if one is not interested in inter-country comparisons, or if one is not interested in intercontinental comparisons, but one is really interested in subnational variation, subnational analysis, especially at the lowest level of public administration, which is in many countries a village, a commune, or a urban ward. Then how do you measure the level of development? How do you measure the income, or how do you measure the development index at that level? Because clearly the concept of gross domestic product at the village level or the urban ward level doesn't either hold, or even if the concept holds, it's very hard to get data for every country, or every village or every ward of that particular country or region. So in trying to understand how does one measure development across villages, we came across the concept of peri-urbanization, and another related concept called urbanicity. And I will describe these in detail. So again, the literature suggested to us that basically just looking at urban rural duality is no longer valid. One needs a more granular approach or a more nuanced approach at looking at the variation in places. So my talk today is going to be split into two parts. The first part, I'm going to be talking about the phenomena of peri-urbanization, and how do you measure it, and once you're able to measure it, how do you map it out so that you can convey that information visually. In the second part, I will say talk about what are the impacts of peri-urbanization now that we know how to measure and map it. So basically, like so many things in research and scholarly work, there is no consensus on the definition of peri-urban places. A fairly comprehensive body of work by Allen 2003 describes these places as a heterogeneous mosaic of natural ecosystems, agro ecosystems, and urban ecosystems. And these places are connected through material and energy flows, depending on the demand and supply of the materials and energy. So again, if we think that there existed across countries different definitions of what is urban and what is rural, which is true. Even if you forget the phenomenon of peri-urban places, even what is urban itself is not a uniform definition across countries. But the definitions of peri-urban places are even more varying and even more challenging. Yet, we tried to come up with some kind of generic approach to measuring this phenomenon. I will share the lessons that we learned. Why should it be important for places like Vietnam or Mongolia or many of the countries in Asia? It's been estimated that about 200 million people will be living in peri-urban areas over the next 25 years, which would be about 40% of Asia's urban population. From an economics perspective, it has been observed that a lot of the foreign direct investment is going directly into peri-urban areas of these countries. And the people who are most likely to be affected by this unplanned investment are small agricultural communities that are forced to switch to an industrial way of life in a very, very short period of time. Normally, in 3 years and 5 years, people who are farmers are now more into industrial economy. We used to joke sometimes that it's hard to, in research terms, scholarly terms, to define what is a peri-urban place. But if you see it, you will know that you are in a peri-urban place. So let me share with you some photographs we took on our field trips in Vietnam. So this is just a little outside Hanoi city. So what we see here is something that you don't see in a typical village. In a typical village or in a typical commune, you will only see farmland. But what we are seeing here is in the foreground farmland, in the background you're seeing industry. And as is very typical of peri-urban areas and agricultural economies, this industry is actually agro-based industry. It's a juice making factory. So what do we have here? It's a patchwork. You have some parcels of land that have been set aside for industries. You have another parcel of land where ages old agriculture is going on. Another example here. Now, in the previous photograph, we saw large industry. Here is an example in the background. You're seeing small sector industries coexisting with agriculture. In all these places, other agroforestry-based industries are common. Now, this is a photograph of timber-related industry. Here you see the kind of houses which you will not see in typical developing country villages. Typical developing country village houses are, just made of wood or temporary materials. But here you see houses which look like you are in an urban area, but you can see also that they're right next to agricultural fields. So the interesting thing is that if someone is parachuted into a peri-urban area and he or she is a stranger there, she looks in one direction and she will think that she's looking at an urban area. And if she turns 180 degrees and looks at the landscape, she will think that she is in a rural area. So that is what is peri-urban places. Now, I would try to get examples from other countries. I could not get many, but this is Ulaanbaatar in Mongolia. In the background, you see the city. In the foreground are the gurs, these tents that traditional farmers use. So maybe at the end of the seminar, if we have participants from Mongolia, they can comment on whether they think that this photograph represents a peri-urban area in Mongolia or not. A kind of cartoon representation of this is that traditionally we had an ancient setup where things were extremely well defined between the city and the rural areas, like a boiled egg. The yellow was hard and like a sphere, and the outside it, everything was farmland. In the 17th and till the 19th century, it became a fried egg. No proper shape, but still discernible. But right now, peri-urban areas is a mishmash, like a scrambled egg. It's a fragmented landscape. And if you have a drone or looking at from a small airplane looking down towards a peri-urban area, you will just see scattered plots of different land use and different land covers. And here is another cartoon that shows that basically the city boundary is moving more and more towards the concept of, the traditional villages. And all this has led and across disciplines, depending on the application, depending on the theoretical perspectives, dozens of terminologies that are at one level very confusing. So you have some people refer to it peri-urban areas as urban fringe, urban, rural urban, suburbs, which is a common word, rural non-farm, urbanicity. Urbanicity is a neat concept which I love. It's basically it creates a continuous scale from 1 to 10 or 1 to 100, and the entire country can be mapped out on where it is on that scale. And this was first largely developed by people who were actually interested in nutrition and how nutrition varies across different levels of ruralness or urbanicity. Desakota, this we are very proud of at the East West Center. It is a concept developed by one of our colleagues in the 80s and 90s, Terry McGee. Peri-urban is what we are talking about. Satellite towns. So you can see that people are using different words for roughly the same phenomena. So there are nuances here, but at the end of the day, the story is that the world is no longer just rural and just urban. So we do take a short deep dive into some theoretical perspectives. Now, again, many authors have written theories on peri-urbanization, but my all-time favorite is this work by Iaquinta and Drescher in 2000, Understanding Rural-Urban Linkages and Their Connection to Institutional Contexts, and also another body of work by Adel, 1999. So basically, Iaquinta says that peri-urban areas are places which are compressed socially, and also that compression of social forms leads to conflicts for resources and social evolution. They have three concepts which are the pillars of their theory: the demographic component, increasing population size and density; the economic component, that is shifting livelihoods. But most interestingly, and I think they are one of the very few who have tackled this, is the social psychological component of people living in these peri-urban areas. They are trying to capture the cultural, socio psychological elements in their definition of peri-urban areas. So that's pretty unique about this body of work. So to continue that, basically what they are stressing is, let me jump to the second bullet point here, that the distance of the peri-urban place to the city center is important, but it is not the defining factor. So the defining factor is basically the previous slide I showed you, the points that the phenomena that they talk about. They say that is where one should begin with those phenomena. One should not begin with how close is that place to a city, how close it is it to the fringe of the city, and so on. It is important, but they suggest that the specification of peri-urban place or the different types of peri-urban places should uh, depend on a theoretical understanding of what causes the peri-urban place to come up, rather than to just look at physical distances. And then, based on different migration patterns, rural to urban migration patterns, or even small towns to big town migration patterns, they further subdivide peri-urban areas into five types. And not just migration, but also the institutional networks and social networks in those places. So these are the five types of peri-urban places they describe: the village peri-urban, the in-place peri-urban, chain peri-urban, diffuse peri-urban, and absorbed peri-urban. I am, in the interest of time, going to skip the details of of each of these five types. Now, the other body of work by Adele, which is basically citing Browder 1995, essentially suggests the same thing, that there is a change in agricultural livelihood patterns, employment patterns, migration is an important component of their theory as well. Then coming to yet another body of work, the Desa Kota, it's an Indonesian word meaning a place which is both a village and a city. And McGee identifies six characteristics of a Desa Kota region. That is, it has a very large population of small farmers. There is an increasing level of non-agricultural activity. The population is very mobile. uh, the farmer may be or a person may be living in the village, but commuting daily to a nearby factory for daily wages kind of work. So that kind of mobility. Also career mobility, that also a mosaic of land use patterns. Uh, Also an increasing level of participation of females in the labor force. And finally, the existence of gray zones where informal economic activities as well as illegal economic activities happen. And quite related to that is a paper by Rigg et al. 2006, looking at South Asia and Southeast Asia. They were looking at uh, changing development patterns, and they identified 8 characteristics that characterize transition in these places. So again, the same, you come across the same thing, that occupations and livelihoods are diversifying. There is mobility. Remittances from migrants play an important role in the rural household economy. Now, they have added a new component to the characteristics, which is extremely important, and that is the average age of the farmers is rising. Uh, the farmers are old. The sons, daughters have left the villages, so the father who stayed back, their age is increasing. And also certain social cultural parameters that describe transition. So we have gone over 4 or 5 theories of what is transition, what is peri-urbanization. So how do you actually measure this? How does one operationalize it? And ultimately, how does then one map it out? So we decided that, okay, let us find out of these 4 or 5 theories that exist, which is the one that we like most or the one that we feel most comfortable working with. And it so happened that it basically chose the Desakota theory and the paper by Riggs as a theory that we could work with. So now those have 6 to 8 characteristics. So each of those characteristics has to be converted to a very specific metric. Finally, we wanted to select a very large region, like a very heterogeneous region. For that, we chose the country of Vietnam and all its more than 11,000 communes and urban wards. So that's all fine. Then you actually need data for your metrics. So we got data from secondary sources like census, sample surveys, past research. Then also, in order to validate some of our findings, we conducted our own primary surveys at the household and village level. And we also, apart from censuses, we also gather data from um, other international surveys like the living standard surveys and poverty mapping work that had been done in Vietnam. Finally, we dump all these data into machine learning model, a statistical model, map it out, and then maps are good on paper, but it has to be validated on the ground. So that is what we did. And ideally, all this should be done in a highly participatory mode by engaging with local stakeholders, gathering local knowledge at each step. We work very closely with with colleagues from the Vietnam National Agricultural University, and they are the ones who made sure that at all levels we were talking to key informants, focus groups, and so on to get. So ultimately, out of the whole universe of let's say a dozen of criteria that can be used to describe places in transition, we chose 4 criteria. One is the dependency on agricultural related income, the amount of land under agriculture, the type of toilet that people use, and vegetation index, how green is that place. So why these 4? Why not other things? And like I stress that migration is an important variable. Female labor participation is an important variable. So why didn't we include that? The answer is very simple. We simply didn't have the data for that because we largely relied for the nationwide model. We relied on secondary sources of data from the census authorities and so on. So whatever they could give us or gave us, we were restricted to that. And so these were the only variables that we could use. The first 3 variables are from government censuses and sample surveys. The fourth variable, the vegetation index, is from remote sensing, more specifically a thing called NDVI. So yeah, here I've listed the data sources. Now it's interesting, a lot of people, everyone knows about the population census that most countries do every 10 years. But what people don't know is that some countries also do a rural agricultural survey periodically, maybe again 10 years, staggered, not at the same time as the population census, staggered by 5 years or so. But Vietnam is the only country that has been regularly doing the agriculture census survey every 5 years. India does it, but let's say every 10 years. But Vietnam does it every 5 years. So it's a very rich data set. And we argue that if one wants to study the process of transition places or peri-urban places, then just relying on the typical population census is not helpful. One has to also try and get information out of the rural agricultural census. So using the machine learning model, this is the map that we have come up with. This is for how the situation was in 2006. So on the left side, you see the national map. The red areas that you see are places that we call are transitional places or peri-urban places. Those are the red places. The green are the rural areas, the typical rural areas. Yellow are urban areas, and the brown areas are the urban core, the city, the hardcore central business district, or places which are just concrete jungles, absolutely no farming, no green spaces, nothing, that kind of situation. The gray areas are places where one or more input variables were missing. And if we zoom in into two of the biggest provinces, or I mean, the most important provinces for Vietnam, Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City, on the right side, you see how the map looks like. So it is, they look, these maps look quite like the scrambled egg cartoon we saw a while ago. Either the, a very badly cooked fried egg or a badly cooked scrambled egg. So, there are some patterns, but you can see things are largely scattered, but in a concentric way. Now, one of the interesting things, and I don't know if all of you will be able to see this, if you focus on the right side, the zooming in on the Hanoi, uh, in the center you have the brown patch, which is the urban core, but then you see a brown line. And that is actually a highway. And what is happening is that if you superimpose Google Earth on this, you will see that brown line that is going from the center of Hanoi towards the northeast. That is essentially a highway. So our machine learning model, even though it was not fed the map of Hanoi or Vietnam, was still able to trace out the highway by looking at development patterns along the highway. Um, so that's pretty interesting visually. So there is confirmation, yes, that this map is working and it's not absurd, or it is not. It doesn't have mistakes. So coming to statistics, Vietnam has about 11,000 communes and urban wards. So we found, according to that map, 71% of those places were rural, 18% were peri-urban, 3% urban, and 4% urban core. But as I said, it's also important to validate these findings. So we visited 50 places, mainly North Vietnam and in South Vietnam. Could not visit too many places in central Vietnam. And we found that our model and the map was almost 90% accurate. Now, but the most interesting part, this should have been clear in the previous map, is that we found, at least qualitatively speaking, three types of transitional places. The ones that are most common are the places which are on the boundary of the city, the periphery of the city. That is the typical classical peri-urban area, places that are on the periphery and the border of a big city. But we also found places along highways which have urban characteristics. This, in some literature, is called as ribbon development. But we also found transitional places to be occurring in provincial capitals and in places where there are industrial estates or coal mining activity or power generation and so on. So again, if I come back to this map, and if you focus on the left side on the uh, uh, national map, you can see that somewhere right in the middle of Vietnam, where there are no big cities, it's not Hanoi, it's not Haiphong, it is not Da Nang, it is not Ho Chi Minh City, none of these big 10 cities, but you will still find the red color there. And when we look at the map, or when we go to those places, we realize that, okay, this is a transitional place because it's a provincial capital, or it's a transitional place because there is a lot of industrial activity happening here. So for us, it was a very important finding that our approach can, identify three transitional places: the peripheral ones, ones that are along highways, and provincial capitals. See, along the highways, when a highway is constructed and it becomes used often, a lot of commercial establishments come along the highway: restaurants, bank, ATM machines, automobile servicing shops. a lot of these services, which begin to give the place an urban flavor. It's not totally urban, but still you have modern toilets there. Uh, Maybe the owner of a restaurant, that is her part-time job. Maybe part of the other time she is a farmer, but now she has a nice restaurant which also probably serves as a living quarter, and she now has a modern toilet there, and so on. So it basically an urban flavor along the highway. So these are the characteristics you find in these places. About 82% of households in rural areas have agricultural income, and only half of that in transitional areas. Sanitation goes from 11% to 57 to 89%. And then land under agriculture, forests, and aquaculture, that's 43%, 42%, and 10%. Now, this is very significant. If you look at the percentage of agricultural land, it has not changed between rural and transitional areas. It's virtually the same, 43 and 42%. The land has in Vietnam, many parts of Vietnam, I don't know whether it still exists now, but there was a law regarding rice cultivation that if a certain land was designated as being where rice can be grown, then the farmer cannot choose to grow any other crop without the government's permission. So that can explain why in peri-urban areas the land under agriculture did not change much. But if you compare the households with agricultural income, you find that it's almost half, right? From 82% it has become 43%. So basically the land and the agriculture remains the same, but the occupational move out from farming livelihoods has almost halved. So that's an extremely important phenomena that's going on in Vietnam. So now we come to the second part of this, that okay, we have some, maybe it's not the perfect definition of transitional places, peri-urban places. We know how to map it. Oh, so what are the impacts? What's going on? Why should we be worried about it? So the first problem that I'm going to be talking about, and this is actually what led us into this whole project, was the problem of bird flu. Yeah, around 2003, 2004, parts of China, Hong Kong, Vietnam, Thailand were very heavily impacted by the bird flu disease. So many millions of birds either died or were deliberately killed by the authorities, leading to a 0.5% reduction in GDP. And also, since 2000 till 2015, there have been more outbreaks in Vietnam and parts of Africa, Taiwan, and so on. But also interestingly, somehow the virus has jumped borders, and even as late as 2014, and even earlier, I mean, even more recent, in the US, there have been different variants of bird flu that have affected the birds, but also a few people have died because of this disease. Not as much as COVID, but yeah. And these are the countries where it's now considered endemic. Previously, scientists and veterinary researchers knew that certain risk factors exist for bird flu: chicken density, duck density, human population, vegetation index, amount of land under rice, amount of land under aquaculture, and elevation, and so on. So, what you see is missing from here is there is nothing in the literature before we came into this that about urbanization and peri-urbanization. So we were interested in the question that how does urbanization affect emerging infectious diseases like bird flu? So using the same map and that we produced for 2006 and collecting data from the animal health department, we got this result. If you look at the last row in this table, it shows that the risk is for bird flu is highest in transitional areas at 33%. and it's actually a little lower in the rural areas, and in urban areas it is 29%. So the statistics after we mapped out, and this is possible only because we know how to map out the transitional areas. So clearly, transitional areas are at a higher risk than rural areas and urban areas. We did a two-level analysis. One is a national level analysis of the entire country using secondary data and data from the Animal Health Department. But we also conducted our own surveys of farmers, asking them more qualitative questions or more socioeconomic kind of questions. And these are, I'd already described the data that we had collected, but just want to stress a few more things that there was some literature that suggested that when there is a diversity in flock sizes of the poultry, either it's duck or chicken, that is either small farmers and big commercial poultry enterprises, when they coexist in a place, that is a place which is at highest risk of bird flu. So that is extensive systems and intensive systems. If they occur in the same village or in the same region, there are leakages, there are the risk of the virus going flock to flock and so on. So though there was this theory, there was no quantitative proof that this can happen. So in order to capture both the land use diversity as well as the poultry flock size diversity, we used a diversity index, which is used very commonly in ecology. And these are the components of the land use diversity we used: agriculture, aquaculture, forests. And we put them all in this machine learning model, a boosted regression tree. And this table is pretty dense. So let me just stress. What we found was that, the explanation for why the peri-urban places that are highest risk. We actually found that chicken density is highest in peri-urban areas compared to rural and urban areas. We found actually the fraction of land under rice is also highest in peri-urban areas. Same thing with aquaculture and duck density, as well as to some extent land use diversity. So basically, the whole concept that diversity in peri-urban areas, that we were able to quantify and show it to be a risk factor. And in terms of mathematics, in terms of pictures, here you can see the ducks, which are considered for bird flu as asymptomatic carriers. So the ducks, they themselves don't get the fever, but they can take the virus between chicken flocks. And here the ducks are interacting with human waste. All the villages, the garbage is being dumped here. People are coming here. So this becomes a place where human beings, ducks, other wild animals, dogs, wild birds. That's another important thing. The wild birds, they interact all in one small little ecosystem. And this is the picture, but the previous charts, they were essentially trying to show the same thing in numbers. So we did find proof that transitional places are at higher risk for infectious diseases, and why they are important is that uh, the disease might uh, arise in peri-urban areas, but because of modern day transportation and airport, I mean, flying, people flying and goods flying from place A to place B, the virus can go all over the world. But it started in a peri-urban area, so that is the important aspect. So we choose the word incubators, that these transitional places are the incubators, but they can be transported the world over. So another important finding we had is, if you focus at the last bullet point on this slide, is that Vietnam in 2006 had more than 1,000 rural communes. That is, the government calls them rural communes, but if you visit those 1100 rural communes, you would actually think that it's more urban, and therefore there is a governance mismatch. And the opposite is also true, that government calls 800 urban wards as being urban, but if you visit them, you would actually think you are in farmland. So again, a governance a mismatch. The second example, now that was infectious disease. The second example I'm giving from air pollution. And here we are again working at the level of urban wards and villages. And air pollution data we get from satellites from this paper by Brower et al. In Environmental Science and Technology. And we use the same maps for 2006 and 2011 that I showed you. So what we found surprisingly is that the average concentration of particulate matter, PM 2.5, is these days is considered the most important pollutant to research as well as regulate. So it's the peri-urban areas that had the highest mean concentration, and compared to either urban areas or even urban core. Urban core was just slightly higher. The mean value is just slightly, no, sorry, the median value, yeah, the black line. Median value is just higher than that of the urban area, but much lower than that of the peri-urban areas across the entire country. If you look at just the Hanoi province, this is again showing that peri-urban parts of Hanoi are the most polluted. We look at transitions, that what was the level of air pollution in 2006, what was the level of pollution in 2011, and what is the change in the pollution levels. So for Hanoi province, the red arrow shows that the highest difference was in places that were rural in 2006 but became peri-urban in 2011. Same thing in Haiphong. The R-P means that the highest change in pollution happened in places that were rural in 2006 and became peri-urban in 2011. In Ho Chi Minh City, probably the level of development was much higher, so we didn't see the same phenomena. But in the other two areas, we saw this very interesting thing. So the question then is, how do you explain that? Why are peri-urban areas more polluted than urban areas? Because we normally think, all the motorbikes in Vietnam, they're in the urban areas, and things are they are the worst polluted areas. So why are we saying that peri-urban areas could possibly be worse? It's because the most of the industries are located in peri-urban areas, maybe the power generating plants, brick kilns, small industries. Vietnam is famous for handicraft villages. Some of them are very polluting. Household cook stoves, and most importantly, the open crop burning, the burning of rice straw. I had shown you a chart earlier where you said that the paddy percentage land is the highest in peri-urban areas. So that means also that the amount of rice straw that is generated in peri-urban areas is very high. So all this leads to ambient air pollution being highest in peri-urban areas. My third example is related to household cooking energies. So it's a very traditional way of cooking food, though this particular lady seems to have been gifted a modern cook stove. But otherwise, it's a problem that globally, when you look at different health risks, household air pollution is ranked number 10 in terms of burden of disease. In low income countries, it's ranked as number 4. And in Vietnam, household air pollution is ranked as number 9, uh, ambient air pollution as number 7. But this for both sexes combined. If you look at just women, then household air pollution has a higher uh, burden of disease. So, using the Rural Agricultural Survey, we did some other modeling, which I will not go into, but look at peri-urban places. One of the interesting things we found that if you look at miscellaneous fuels, what are miscellaneous fuels in Vietnam? It's basically just the straw, the crop residues that are burned. Um, and in 2006, 12% of peri-urban households were using it, and in 2011, it had only decreased by 4, whereas in rural areas, it went from 14% to 3%. So basically, that the rural areas got out of burning crop residues much faster than peri-urban areas. So that's puzzling. But ours is not the only work to find it. Another study conducted in some parts of North Vietnam confirmed the same finding. And the reasons we believe are that people who are, especially in North Vietnam, using coal, and coal was not available to them for some reason. They could not switch to gas because they are not rich enough to switch to gas. At the same time, in the vicinity of the peri-urban areas, there are no forests, so they can't even go to the forest and cut wood or gather wood. But on the other hand, there is a surplus of the straw, rice straw, so it becomes a very easy fuel to burn. So again, what we are seeing here is that certain agricultural phenomena in peri-urban areas is causing, a very funny, weird situation. It's not linear. It's not simple. So with this slide, I'm going to probably end. What are the main takeaways from my seminar? As I've kept saying, the world is no longer neatly divided into just pure urban places or pure rural places. So what I like to use the word is transitional places. These are transitional places are places which have mixed rural and urban characteristics. As I said, if you are parachuted into a transitional place, you look in one direction, you will think you're in a farm. You look in the other direction, you will think you're in a city. So peri-urban places for me, they are only a subset of transitional places, though they are the major uh, subset. The other transitional places, as I said, they are the ones that are along highways or in provincial capitals. Peri-urban places are not homogeneous. They can be as many as half a dozen different types of peri-urban places, depending on migration patterns and social networking. Through the kind of work that I have presented, and then later I found that many people have improved upon our methods, adapted our methods for other developing countries or even European countries. So now there exist methods on how to map out peri-urban or transitional places, but my recommendation would be to make this highly participatory and multidisciplinary. In our work, we are combining remote sensing, sociological theories, everything to understand what is transition. But now the sad thing is that these transition places, they represent the worst of both worlds. Like the air pollution case, you have all forms of pollution happening in transitional places. So rather than planning out peri-urbanization in a way that one can have the best of both worlds, we are in a situation where we have worst of both worlds, and that is what is the messy middle. And the challenge is that because governments still look at their country only as rural and urban, they are misclassifying places, and therefore certain departments, let's say, if there is a mayor or a mayor's assistant in a city, yet pockets of that city have poultry, livestock, it they don't know how to deal with that because it's not part of their training. It's not part of their mission to look at livestock management or poultry management in cities. So these kind of governance mismatches occur. So our job as people who are interested in peri-urbanization is to spread the word that, yes, there are challenges in defining and mapping them, but one has to keep improving these methods, and it's possible. It's not that it's impossible. So yeah, thank you for your attention, and if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Okay. Dear Samsit, thanks a lot. I think it was a wonderful presentation, a very interesting literature review, and summary of what was happening in this field in the last decades. But what I really like is, of course, the last parts, and yeah, there are lots of thought-provoking ideas there. And my first question is whether you have where can we read about this your research? Do you have any publications? And because there are really lots of interesting ideas there, and we would probably all want to use them and cite them.
Yeah, for sure. I can send you the PDF files if you just let me know where to send them to, or I can send the references. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
There are
So
at least three or four papers that encapsulate my
okay,
talk. Yeah.
all right. So we'll probably need this. Okay, so we'll probably have time for a couple of questions. So if anyone from the audience have questions, please. Okay, if not, I have plenty of questions. I'm not sure how much time we have, but so the first question that was sort of bothering me through your presentation is, so okay, there is this governance mismatch in Vietnam. So the some communes, they are peri-urban, but they are governed as rural communes. So the obvious question is, what to do about it? For instance, if you'd be like a chief in Communist Party, what would you do about this mismatch?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not a governance expert, so I don't know the nitty-gritties to the specific answer.
Mm-hmm.
So, as I said in my last slide or second last slide, is that the job of geographers, urban planners, I mean, I'm not sure about urban planning, but at least geographers, are the kind of work we did is at least to go to the government and officials and tell them that there's a mismatch, show them on the maps or show them with the data, saying that there are rural places which have a lot of toilets. If there are a lot of toilets, there is a sanitation problem. But typically, in many developing countries, the rural authorities have no training in sanitation matters. Laying out of sewer lines and those kind of stuff. So, uh,
Mm-hmm.
as I said, I'm not a governance expert. I don't know what institutional changes one will have to make, but I think we have enough evidence to show that the classification mismatch exists. And not just in Vietnam, virtually all developing countries, I would say, especially the ones that are developing rapidly and that are that began as agricultural heavy economies and now moving towards industrialization.
Okay, so what I see here is there's also so the reason for this governance mismatch is probably the temporal mismatch. So basically, the institution, they do not follow the community, the situation. So yeah, that's actually something extremely interesting, at least for me. Was then I have a question about the renewables, whether they affect somehow this peri-urban areas, especially in the last decades, whether you have noticed anything about
Sorry, what is that?
the renewables,
Renewable energy.
renewable energy.
Oh, yeah. I don't think in these countries, or developing countries, that plays any role in
Mhm.
defining
That's also interesting,
or
actually.
shaping
Because
peri-urbanization.
in the literature we are reading that all the developing countries, they will probably switch directly to renewables, and they will have plenty of renewables everywhere. Everything will be covered with the sun panels and biofuels and things like this. But in fact, yeah, it's interesting that it doesn't really happen yet.
Yeah, I mean, so far, at least the period of work that I described, I don't think uh, renewable energies had, uh, penetrated so much to have made a difference in the rate of urbanization or the rate of peri-urbanization and so.
Hmm. Okay, so yeah, that was you have a couple of other questions, but yeah, we'll probably can discuss it later. So again, thank you a lot for this thought-provoking webinar. I hope everyone enjoyed it. So we can thank Dr. Samit Saxena. And I would also like to invite everyone for our next seminar that will take place next Wednesday, 1st of December. And we'll have Anatoly Kucher from Kharkiv National University, and he will present on sustainable soil management in the context of climate change. So I hope will also quite an interesting webinar. So please join us. Okay, so thanks again, and
Thank you.
yeah, hope
And
to
thanks
see
to
you.
the participants for being patient.
Yeah. Okay, so
Bye.
it's great. Bye bye. Okay, let's see.